Hi, this is Todd Geist, and welcome to this little video on list processing. List processing turns out to be something you got to do fairly often in FileMaker. It comes up a lot. And by list processing, I mean you want to take a list of items like I have over here on the left side of the screen and do something to each item in the list and either modify each item, perform some math on each item, or filter the list and make it smaller based on some criteria. You can do that with lots of different techniques. You can use a recursive custom function, and that's not what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at using a different method of processing lists. And the reason is that you can't always use a custom function, and sometimes recursion can be slow. So having other ways to handle list processing is a good idea. Now, in this demo, we're going to work our way up from some simple stuff all the way up to a fairly complex use case where we are building this navigation bar here, which goes through the different slides in our demo, and it actually does list processing to do some of this, and we're going to look at how that works. So starting off simple, we're going to use substitution. That's going to form the basis of everything that we do throughout the rest of this demo. We're going to use the substitute function to substitute the carriage return, which is at the end of every item in a list, and that's how we're going to modify and perform functions on our list. So let's look at this setup here on the slide. So as I said, on the left we have a list of text, and then we have a calculation in the middle there, FileMaker calculation. And I decided to do the demo showing the calculations in fields because I thought I could make it bigger and make it easier to see. And then on the far right we have the result of applying this function to that list. Let's just run through this calc. I'm using a let function, which is one of my favorites, and the first let variable is the list, and I'm just setting that to our list of text over here, demo list of text field. I then got I have some empty variables here, prefix and suffix, and we're going to be using those to substitute into our, we're going to use those in our equation down here. So looking at the bottom part of the equation, you can see the substitute function here. So we're substituting the list, in the list, we're substituting carriage return for this function here, or this expression here, which is suffix and carriage return and prefix. So let's take a look at something very simple here. We're just going to put an S in suffix, and that will actually put an S at the end of each line. And the reason is because what we're saying is, hey, swap out the carriage return, which is over here, right at this guy. Swap it out with suffix and carriage return, prefix still being empty. So the S goes first, then our carriage return, and you see our result. Now the reason we need suffix at the bottom here also is because there's no carriage return at the end of the list. So we have to add suffix at the bottom as well, so our last guy gets his S. And you can see that if I temporarily comment that out, we lose our S there. So that's pretty simple, just a suffix. Now let's look at adding something to the beginning of the line, and let's just put sum are good. So now we have some apples are good, some oranges are good, etc., etc. So we can make it grammatically correct. We'll put a period there. And so that's how it's working. So we're able to put something before and after each item in the list simply by using substitute to do that for us. All right, so in section 2, in this next section here, we're going to look at doing something a little more complicated. And what we have now is on the left-hand side, we have a list of numbers, followed by our calculation, and finally our result. And in this case, what we want to do is perform some math on each item in the list. And we start out with pretty much the same thing. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to use evaluate and the list function to craft. We're going to use list function to craft ourselves a nice FileMaker expression, and then evaluate and get the results. So it'll make a little more sense as I go on here. So let's start by just multiplying each line item by 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by crafting what begins to look a little bit like a FileMaker expression. So let's make that out there. So we now have a line that is 12 times 2, 34 times 2, So kind of building on the same thing we did before, but now we're making something that begins to look like a FileMaker calculation. Now this isn't going to work if we tried to evaluate that. It would fail because it wouldn't be a valid calculation. But we can make it a valid calculation by wrapping a little bit more text at the top. So we go list, and then we're going to say at the end here and that. And if we look at, what did I do? I forgot an ampersand there. And there we go. So now that begins to look a little bit more like it. Let's clean that up a little bit. I like to add returns here just to make it a little easier to read as I'm debugging this. So now we have a list function that just simply has expressions that will be evaluated when we apply evaluate to all of this. So let's go ahead and do that. So the very last thing we'll do is we will add evaluate to our calc, and now we will get the result we were looking for. So each line item, each list of numbers has been multiplied by 2. And we didn't have to use recursion to do that. We're simply using substitute and list to build an equation, and then we're using evaluate to evaluate that equation. You can see we could add more to the beginning of this. We could say 100. So that's now going to build our calculation with 100 times 100 plus our item times 2, and that's what we're going to get. So now we can see how we can start to build up a FileMaker calculation and then evaluate that calculation over every item in the list. So in this next section, filter by expression, what we're going to do is we're going to take our list of numbers and we're going to apply some kind of FileMaker logic to filter that list and return a subset of the result. Now in this case I am using a custom function, and let me show that to you. But it's based on the same thing we were doing before. We are still doing a substitute, and if we look down here, we'd see a substitute down here in the bottom. But I don't want to be carting this big nasty calculation around, so we're just making a custom function out of it. And you can see I've got that here. Filter values by expression, and it takes the list, demo list of numbers, this guy over here. And in this case, I'm just passing true, which is a valid FileMaker expression equal to 1. And therefore, since it's true, every item in the list will be returned in the result. Now, if I pass in false, I'm going to get nothing in the result because this is a valid FileMaker calculation equal to false or 0. So 0 is actually the same as false, and 1 is actually the same as true, right? So, but we can get a little more creative. We can say, we can actually do some math on here and actually try to build up a FileMaker expression to filter this list. So how do we do that? The filter values by expression provides a keyword item for each item in the list. So you can use that as you craft a FileMaker expression. So we can say item has to be greater than 50. Now when we do that at first, we're going to get an error 102 because we need a string literal for the expression here. So we need an actual string. We pass that in and we get 56. Now that's actually correct, but it's not exactly what we wanted because of course we have 1,000 over here, and 1,000 is clearly bigger than 50. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is that we need to wrap this in get as number because the calc engine doesn't know in this case whether or not that item is text or number. So once we do that, we're going to get 56 and 100. So we can put any valid FileMaker expression in here, and we can include item as a keyword anywhere in that calculation. And if the result of that calculation is true, the value will be returned. So in this case, get as number item is greater than 50, only 56 and 1,000 are returned. So I've got another example of very much the same thing where we are going to do, we're just going to do some text here. So with the same issue, right, if we've got true, everything's being returned. But I can now begin to write some fun expressions here. I can say pattern count. Let's say I want to know all of the I want to get every list item that has 3 A's in it. So we're going to say pattern count item. That's a stand-in for our list item. and we're going to put in A, and we're going to say that needs to be greater than 3. Now, this is going to fail first. We're going to get an error, and that's because since this is a string literal we need to pass in, we're going to need to escape our text quotes here by simply putting a / and, oh, I didn't quite get it. I need to put, what did I do there? Pattern count item. It actually should be working. Okay, so the reason that wasn't working is because it was greater than 3, and there are no words that have more than 3 A's. There's only 2. I meant to put a 2 in there. So now if we properly construct our string and get everything correct, we should get banana. So that's fairly straightforward, but we can build on this. We can pass in, we can make more complex calculations. We could, for example, say, give me everything that has more than 2 A's, or let's say it has to begin with a P. So let's do left item 1 has to equal a P. Again, we're going to have to escape those quotes, and we go like that, and I didn't need that quote, that one there. There we go. So now we get banana or pineapple. So filter values by expression is really powerful. It lets you take any list and use any FileMaker expression you want to return a subset of those values. All right, in the last section, this is where we're going to put everything that we've talked about into practice in how to craft something like this interface we have here. We have a navigation bar and some slide panels going that are sliding left to right. So to do that, first thing I want to bring up is we have this function that I've called getLayoutObjectNames. Now this is a custom function, and let me just clear that out there. So we can, I'm actually going to start again. Okay, this is last section, start over here. Last section, take 3. All right, in this last section, we're going to look at how to build on the techniques that we've been talking about and put them into practical use as a sort of navigation scheme here on our layout. To do that, first we're going to look at a custom function that I created called getLayoutObjectNames, and it's a pretty big, nasty one, and I'll just show it to you. Here it is, getLayoutObjectNames, and it's fairly involved, and that's why it's a custom function. I wouldn't want to have to carry that guy around. So getLayoutObjectNames takes 6 optional filters, and you can add them or not, and in this case we don't have any. So on the right on the right hand side of the result column, you can see the result. And what the result is a list of all the layout objects on this layout. So these are named layout objects, and this is it's really helpful to be able to deal with these guys in an effective way, because they do form sort of the backbone of a lot of the new navigation techniques that we get in FileMaker 13. We're using them here to slide from panel to panel from our nav bar, but they're also used in popover sometimes. You can trigger a popover by going to an object. They're used for navigating tab panels sometimes. They're used for a lot of things. So having a good handle, a good way to get at the named objects on a layout is really, really useful. And so that's what this guy does. So let's take a look at each of the parameters here. So first of all, the first parameter we have is type. So that means I can do exactly what it sounds like. I can get a list of all of the buttons that are on a layout. So these are all the named layout objects that are buttons, and they have a name, and there they are. What else can I do? I can also get everything that starts with something. So the second one is, I can say first, and that gives me just the first button. Enclosed by, this is a interesting one. I'm going to hold off on that. We'll get to that in a minute. Is front panel is a nice one, and we're using that as well, also in this demo, and we'll look at that in a minute too. But just to give you an idea of what that can do, let me get all of the slide panel. I want a slide panel that is the frontmost, and I get 2, container and slide 5. So this is the 5th slide for this slide. There's also another container, another slide panel here that has one panel. It's called container. And let's take a look at how I've got this set up, because that's what we're going to do next. We're going to understand how these are all playing together here. So if we look at the layout, there are 2 slide panels. The first one is called container, and then inside that I have another one, and that other one has 5 different panels. So the second slide control with 5 panels is contained entirely by the first panel. And so what that lets us do is if we go back to layout mode, we can use enclosed. So let's get all the slide panels that are enclosed by container. And there they are, slide 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now we can sort of use that to slice into our layout and get a more targeted subset of items simply by saying, give me all the children of this object, give me all the ones that are inside it. And this turns out to be really, really useful in a lot of ways. So let's look at a couple. So first of all, in our navigation, we have a series of buttons up here that are calling a single script that's just called slide navigation, and they're all passing the button number. So the first one is 1, the second one is 2, etc., etc., etc. And all the way to the end, we have the last one being 5. So that script simply gets a parameter, which button was clicked, and then the script figures out which slide I wanted to go to. And I do this all dynamically based on the slide panels that are enclosed inside that container. And the reason to do this dynamically is because layout object names might change, and we're going to look at that here. So first let's look at the script. So here it is. In the first part of the script, we're just getting the slide number, and we are putting that, it's the script parameter, setting into a variable slide number. The next part here is we're getting all the layout objects that are slide panels that are inside the container object. So that will be a list of our slide panels from left to right in order, from top to bottom. Then the target panel, the one we want to navigate to, is nothing more than those panels that I got, and I use getValue to get the particular slide number out. And then we simply use a go to object name with the target panel. We set script animation on first so that we get the nice sliding thing, and then we use freeze window just to update the conditional formatting. So let's take a look at how that works in the script debugger. So we'll go to browse mode, go back to our correct panel, and let's start up the script debugger. Let's put it over here, and we'll click the second button. So here we go. We have slide number. Let me bring up this guy, and we'll put him over here so we can see our variables populate. Slide number, number 2. Panels. Here is our list of panels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then our target panel is simply going to be getValue on that using the first one. We get slide number 2. And then we go to that object, and you can see the panel slide in the background there. And we use freeze window to update our conditional formatting. So that's how the navigation works. And what's cool about it is that it doesn't really matter what the name of the slide panels are. So if we go into layout mode and I change, let's go and change slide panel number 2 to, let's just call it number 2. And that's all I have. We don't, our code is smart enough to be able to figure it out. So it's still going to navigate to the second panel, no problem. Because we weren't referencing that panel by its hard-coded name. We were simply referencing it by, it's the second panel inside the larger container object. So we're dynamically figuring out which panel to go to, and then we go to that one. So the other place that this is used, we're using this getLayoutObject custom function, is in the, we want to use it for conditional formatting because we want to change and update which button gets the red highlight depending on which slide is frontmost. So we use that in our conditional formatting functions. Let's look at that, conditional formatting. And we're going to pull that up here. There it is. And it's a little bit complicated. I won't dive into the details. You can get the demo file and take a look at it. But the important thing here to note is that we're using getLayoutObjectNames. We're saying, first, give me the name of which one is first, which one I'm on. So if this is number 1, give me the slide panel that's number 1. And then say, is it equal to a slide panel that is the frontmost? That's that parameter there, 1, saying which one of those 5 slide panels is frontmost. And if it's equal, if they're the same, then we know that this particular button should be highlighted. And so the only thing that changes from button to button is the first value here, number 2, number 3, number 4, etc. So that pretty much wraps up this demo. Just to recap, we looked at how to use Substitute to process list items one after the other, or to perform math on them. And then we looked also at a custom function which can filter any list by any FileMaker expression. And then we looked at another custom function, getLayoutObjectNames, which we use to build some fancy navigation. And getLayoutObjectNames is actually using the same technique that we started with at the very beginning. It's using Substitute to build up an expression and then to return the results. So that concludes this little quick hit on list processing. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.